Good evening, my fellow vampire lovers. The sun is going down, and you know what that means. It's time for me to record another episode of my podcast, The Beautiful Dead. As always, I'm your host, Lena Nazari. It's easiest to just go to Instagram and find me, The Beautiful Dead Podcast, or you can go to lenanazari.com. That's where you can join my mailing list and also know the places that I will be at. I just got back from Monster Mania. It was so much fun. I did post a lot of pictures from there, but more importantly, I did Lost Boys with Hack the Movies, and I had so much fun. You have to go check that out. That's Hack the Movies, and I'll put the link in the video description. So I know I told you this episode will be the season finale, and that technically is true. However, it's going to have to span 2 weekends because we got to talking and we realized there was no way we were going to talk about 8 books in one sitting. So you get today's episode, and then you're going to get another one next week, and we actually have another special guest join us who also would like to talk about the Anita Blake series. And that's right, we're talking about the Anita Blake series. So today you're going to get books 1 through 4, and next week you get 5 through 8. And if you have not read the books, that's okay. You can listen to us talk about it. We do a quick synopsis, and then we just talk about our thoughts and feelings about these amazing books. If this is not your cup of tea, that's okay. But this is the end of this season. I will be back the beginning of January. I'm going to take some time, not just to enjoy the holidays and be with my family and try and recover, but work is very stressful right now, and I'm working on the screenplay of Bite Shift, plus I'm working on my 5th book, Alex. So I need to take a little break from the podcast, but please continue to follow me on Instagram, see all the things that I'm up to, and join my mailing list so you know if I add on any kind of appearances or what the latest update is with my books. All right, this is a long episode, so why don't we just go ahead and get to it? Bye.
I couldn't. I love the night. That's the only time I feel really alive.
That's what David wanted.
Blood, I was to find, was a necessity as well.
A vampire in love with a slayer. It's rather poetic. I am the monster the breathing men would kill. I am Dracula.
Thank you so much for doing this. I'm so excited. We have been talking about this for months. This is months of planning, months of preparation. I'm so excited this is finally happening. And it may just be you and me, and no one ever watches, but frankly, I don't care because I am so excited to do this. So please, for the watchers and listeners, introduce yourself, tell everyone who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Ray. Rachel, I go by Ray for short. Can be found on all of the platforms at @DarthRay_CosFit. So that's COSFIT. I work in higher education professionally, but I'm also a part-time personal trainer and fitness instructor. And one of my primary hobbies is cosplay. So we met at a convention, and I bought your book, and we kind of just stayed connected over social media. And then we realized we both love this book series, and I started cosplaying the character, and now we're here. So that's really cool.
I know. Once I saw that you were starting it, I got schoolgirl giddy because there's not a lot of people who know this series, but the ones who do,
they're passionate.
They know it. They love it.
Yeah.
And so it's exciting not only for me to revisit them, but for me to be hearing your comments and things as you're reading them for the first time. It's been very exciting, and I'm really excited to do this. Here's what we're going to do. And I was just saying to Ray, this might end up being 2 parts. We'll see. We'll see how this goes. But what we are going to do, first, I want you to just give everyone a little synopsis of how you found Anita Blake, because you told me before I hit record.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll try to tell the shorter version for everyone else. When I was like 14 or 15 years old, so for context, I am 31. So about half my life ago, my older brother gifted me the first trade of the Anita Blake comic books. So when Marvel did the run of comic books of Anita Blake, it was one of those things where he was like, he needed to find a birthday present for me. I have an October birthday, and he was like, I don't know, this looks like something you'd be into. She looks like a badass, and there's vampires in the title. Have fun. And I was like, okay. So I read that and I absolutely loved it. But then that book, or that comic trade kind of got lost to the years in some of my comic books. And I always had it. I always knew it was there, but it was one of those things I just never really revisited. And then I moved to Cincinnati a little over a year ago, and I had all my comic books in these different art bins in my office. And I was going through my books and I was going to downsize some of it. And I came across Anita. And at this point, years later, I've been cosplaying since about 2017, 2018. And I was like, I was sitting on like cross-legged on my butt on the floor, like carpet of my office. And I'm just reading, I'm going through this trade again. And I'm like, holy shit, this is really good. Why did I never pursue this beyond this? Also, now my hair this is not natural, but like I have black hair, and I'm like, why have I never thought to do this before? So yeah, I decided I wanted to cosplay the character, but I want to do it right. And I'm one of those people with cosplay that I only cosplay characters that I feel pretty knowledgeable about or really connected to. So I was like, well, I'm not going to commit to this cosplay until I've at least read the actual books. So I did, and by like I think the middle of the first book, maybe the beginning of the second book, I was like, yeah, I'm doing this cosplay.
Yes.
And now I'm listening through, I'm doing the audiobooks, and I'm listening through the series for the first time, and I am on the ninth book, Obsidian Butterfly, and I am thoroughly obsessed.
I know. And so we're pretty much together right now. This
Yeah.
is my third time with the books. I'm 44. So when the books started coming out, I was in high school. So they were kind of in my periphery because they were similar to things I was already interested in. But I don't think it was until Buffy the show started and I was in college and we were watching the show together every Sunday night. We would like meet up in a dorm room that somebody said, "Oh, have you read the Anita Blake novels?" So I think by the time I started them, she was about 4 in. I think she's like
Okay.
107 books in at this point or something. It's a huge series, but
Yeah.
I remember reading them and then having to wait for the next one to come out. And then found them again maybe 5 years ago, audio platform this time.
Yeah.
And now I'm listening to them again so that we could talk about them because I wanted it to be fresh and I wanted to be able to have it as fresh in my brain as it is for you and talk about them. But it's funny how from 20 years old to 30 years old to 44 years old, the books can change.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, especially you and I have been texting back and forth about one particular character that we will get to that might have seemed dreamy when you were younger, but now you're just like,
Yeah.
so here's how we're going to do this. So I have synopses of each book just to sort of refresh our memories because they do start to kind of bleed together. So the first couple books are a little more hefty than the rest because we have so much character exposition. But as I read these, please feel free to comment or wait till the end and we can just talk about the whole book. Whatever you want to do, this is totally chill. But it was just to remind us of what happens in each book because it does start to kind of all...
Yes, especially listening to them and like listening to them like as soon as one ends, I go to the next one. So it like the whole thing is just I am reading Anita Blake.
Yes.
That will stop a long time from now.
Yeah, and I'm so glad I went back and refreshed myself for this conversation because I too would have been like, well, doesn't this thing happen? And then it probably would have been a book ahead and I would have ruined stuff for you. So now at least I know. And we're both on Obsidian Butterfly together. So
perfect.
But it has been fun, especially knowing how it all turns out. To go back to the beginning has been like, huh. And as a writer too, I wonder like, did she know that this would happen in book 8 when she wrote this in book 1? Probably not.
Probably not.
Probably not, but it all worked out okay. So. All right, so we're going to do it. Anita Blake, number 1, Guilty Pleasures.
Ooh.
Which I wish that place was real. Am I right? All right. So our books are set in St. Louis, Missouri for the most part. We do step away to different cities every once in a while, but we will tell you if we do that. Anita Blake is our heroine, our main character of the story. She's 5'3" with long black curly hair and dark eyes. She has scars from her side profession, which we'll talk about in a minute. The most notable scar is a cross-shaped one on her forearm. She wears black jeans, black tennis shoes, and either a black or red top, and she is rarely not armed. These are my synopses, by the way. You're going to be able to pick up on it.
No, I absolutely love it because it's so accurate.
We meet Anita, who works for an agency that raises people from the grave. She is an animator for hire, among other jobs, which we will get to. We quickly learn that vampires are out of the coffin and recognized by the US government, and we learn that there's been a series of vampire murders, and a vampire named Willie McCoy has been sent to Anita to ask her to look into the murders, a request that she denies. Side note, Willie is one of the only people she knew as a human and is now a freshly turned vampire. How do we feel about Willie? Oh,
I like Willie.
I know.
I think he's such a dweeb.
I know.
He
Don't
just
you
wants to be
like,
a cool guy, and he's just forever going to be a crony, and I love that about
and
him.
he always just ends up wrong place, wrong time. You're just
Yeah.
like, Willie.
And for who he is, I feel like he still genuinely cares about Anita. Like he really wants to be a bad guy, and he's just totally incapable of actually
No,
doing
he
it.
wants to be a maid guy. He wants to be like
Yes.
a mafia guy, and he just
Mhm.
like
But he's
he
always like,
listens
okay,
in
boss. Like I imagine his voice like, okay, boss, whatever you say, Jean-Claude.
with the
Okay, boss.
hair
Like that's how
slicked back. Me
yes. Like
too.
he is such a New Jersey sleazeball,
Same.
and I love
That's exactly how I picture
it.
him. And like Hawaiian shirts and like a
Yeah.
gold, yeah. The first vampire rule that we learn is that silver will not stop them, but a wound from silver is slow to heal for a vampire. So that's our first rule that we learn. Anita's roped into a bachelorette party for her friend Catherine by a fellow bridesmaid named Monica. Because Anita doesn't drink, she is suckered into being DD and is taken to the riverfront, or as other people call it, Blood Square, because that's where the vampire-owned businesses are, including the place they go, Guilty Pleasures, a vampire-run strip club. Again, wish it was real.
Right.
We learn the way that she describes these men, I'm just like, oh
It's
my.
not real, but I want it so bad.
This is our next vampire rule. We learn that vampires who have fed look more human with more color to their skin. And we get two more rules. Crosses and holy relics will burn and repel vampires, but only if you have faith. And the second one is never look a vampire in the eye because they can
Yeah.
mesmerize you.
I sidebar with that rule. I love the fact the mechanic worked in that you have to have faith behind the cross. I think that is such a
I
clever
hate
way.
that trope.
Really?
Hate it. Hate it. I hate Saved by Faith. And now anytime you see it, you're gonna think of me. I hate
Yeah.
when they're like holding up the cross and the vampire's like, that only works if you have faith. And then at the end, the person like musters faith in the vampire. I'm just like, oh, come on. Stop.
I mean, yeah, it's a little cop-outy cheesy, but I
Yes.
love the line where she's like, nothing more pathetic than an atheist holding up a cross.
Oh, I know that is a good line.
I think that's fantastic.
And I
So
just
yeah,
watched
it's a
something
little
where
bit goofy.
it is goofy, but I see why they work it in because it is
I love it.
classic.
Yeah.
I always think it's weird. I just saw this in Bordello of Blood, where the cross works, but not the Star of David. I'm like, why? It should work. The
Yeah,
rules.
I feel like any holy symbol should work.
But like I always say, they didn't expect a nerd with a podcast to break down their rules and question.
Not the nerd of the podcast.
Take her microphone. All right. So we're going to meet some important people here. The first one is Jean-Claude, the owner of the club, a 200-plus-year-old French vampire, as far as we know, with a cross scar on his chest, a voice that has an effect on humans. He has shoulder-length black hair, dark blue eyes, and is lean. He dresses in a way that you would expect: black leather pants, flowing poet shirts, frilly lace shirts, blah, blah, blah. Sidebar, Soren from my book is heavily based on Jean-Claude.
Yes, I was okay. So sidebar for the listeners, I am halfway through your book because I read it every night before bed,
Mm-hmm.
and I was trying so hard to like binge through it before we were gonna record, and then just life and the world blew up, and I was like, I'm gonna savor this. But I'm
Yeah.
halfway through it now, and I knew that you said that before I started reading it, and so every time I'm like reading a Soren scene, I'm like, I see Jean-Claude in there, and I love it. It's
It's
so
an
good.
amalgamation of all my favorites. So it's a little bit Lestat from Queen of the Damned, a little bit
Mhm.
Spike, a little bit Eric Northman, with a healthy mix of Jean-Claude, so he's not a complete bastard.
You said like all of my favorite vampires
See?
except for one, so that's fine.
There you go. You're my
I
audience
love
right
it.
there.
I love it.
The other important person is Philip. He's a human and one of the dancers. He has thick, shoulder length brown hair. He's muscular, scarring all over his body from years of being what Anita calls a vampire junkie. So we learn that this is a human who is addicted to being fed on because the vampires can roll you. They make it very pleasurable. So sometimes it becomes sort of an addiction. Then we meet a vampire named Robert, and he's able to share the sensation of feeding from Philip with the crowd, almost like a shared empathy, which is a very interesting power, I thought. So this is where we learn that Anita's side job is she's a vampire expert and executioner. She's a liaison to the police on vampire crimes, and we learn that she has a natural partial immunity to the vampires because of her necromancy. Now, she doesn't know totally yet that she's a necromancer, but she does recognize that she has a little bit of an immunity and can sometimes look them in the eye. She's called out to the club, to her relief, to a crime scene at a graveyard where a man has been attacked and eaten. And this is where we meet Dolph, the sergeant of the Spook Squad, also known as the Regional Preternational Investigation Team. So these are police officers who handle supernatural crimes. And this is the police squad's answer to supernaturals coming out of the coffin, coming out of the woodwork. So in this world, we have witches and werewolves and all types of fantastical creatures along with our vampires. And so they have their own laws, they have their own police squad, and they also have not gotten the same rights. So they're fighting for rights as well. So she is sort of a liaison to the spook squad. And we find out that her boss sort of like lent her out so that he could get some press onto his business. So she comes out to help them. She explains that the crime scene makes her think it's ghouls, but they normally don't travel or attack humans. So she's a little confused by that one. She returns to the club to get the women in the bachelorette party and admits to Jean-Claude that she has killed 14 vampires in her role as the sanctioned vampire executioner. So we learn that vampires are protected individuals unless they mess up. So if they commit a crime, Anita gets sent to stake them. So she's sort of the boogeyman of the vampires.
I love it.
This is when we learn that some vampires are masters, like Jean-Claude. And we learn that you're either made a master or you're not. So when you're turned, you either have the ability to become a master or you don't. It doesn't matter how old you are. We also find out that they always have two fangs that are ever present, but the older ones can hide theirs. The younger ones flash them when they smile, which I thought was an interesting thing. Back at the club, we meet Aubrey, who tries to mind control Anita, and we learn that she uses her natural ability and pain to fight the vampire powers. So I thought that was interesting. If you hurt yourself, it breaks the hold. Jean-Claude steps in, sends Aubrey away. We also learn that the older the vampire, the stronger their powers. That's pretty classic. And the vampires are fast and agile. So to humans, it appears that they teleport or they appear out of nowhere, but it's actually just they're very fast, and Anita can actually see them move, whereas most people cannot. We learn that vampires can wipe your memories, which is always a favorite of mine. Very handy. And we learn that they do sleep in coffins, or if they have to, they can be in a bed. It just, no sunlight can get to them. And later on, we'll talk about what happens when they go to sleep. Jean-Claude explains to Anita that while she was away, her friend Catherine was put under the thrall of Aubrey, and that hold can't be broken until death, which I thought was interesting. So if the vampire rolls you once, then that's it. They can control you for the rest of that's a wild power. To protect her friend, Anita agrees to look into the vampire murders. So we find out Willie was sent by Jean-Claude. And he says, if you look into these murders, then I'll make sure that Catherine is safe. We also learn that vampires have heartbeats, but only if they're fed. So the longer they go without feeding, the slower their heartbeat is till they just don't have a heartbeat. Interesting. We also learned that Anita can guess a vampire's age. So she can like feel their age. So I thought that was kind of cool.
I think that's really cool because it also kind of speaks to like her powers and I don't know. I think that might have to go that and this could totally come out later in the books. I don't know, but like it speaks to her like natural immunity too. Is like not only can she see them and like moving and different things, but I
Correct.
think it's like she is just very immune to them in general to the point
Right.
where they're almost on an equal level, but
Right.
not.
And we do touch on this in, I think, the book that we just finished, which was 8, which is where
Mhm.
she was worried that she was um, more dead magic than good
Yeah.
because of her connection to the vampires, because of the necromancy. She even explains like my magic is death magic. So
Mhm.
we'll get to this, but at the end of 8, when she fights off that evil at the end of 8, she
Yeah.
recognizes, oh, maybe I am still kind of good, but she does question that a lot,
hmm It's
especially
so
as
good.
I know it's so good. But to be able to like guess a vampire's age, so she's able, for the people who are confused at this point, she's able to like feel the vampire and then she can be like, well, you're about 100. And she can
Mhm.
also tell if they're masters or not. So that's pretty cool. That at least you
Fancy.
know who you're up against. This is one of my favorite tropes. So cheesy. So Jean-Claude is taking Anita to meet Nikolaos, which is the person that is insisting that Anita come down and talk to them about these vampire murders. Nikolaos is Jean-Claude's master, the master of the city. They see a cop car, so to stop suspicion, they pretend to be lovers down, on the Blood Square, and they make out to try and decrease suspicion. That's one of my favorite things. They're like,
I
quick,
love
make
it.
out with me. I love it.
Darn.
I love it. And of course, she's affected. Um, but because of this kiss, she's able to recognize that he's actually hiding a lot of power. So she starts to kind of question his power and his age and realizes that he's one of the very few vampires that can hide this from her. We also meet our first were animals. Do you remember the first were animals we meet?
Oh. Hmm.
I didn't remember until I reread it.
I don't remember. Who are
It's
the
the
first ones they
animal that
meet?
Nikolaos can call.
Oh, the rats!
Yes.
Oh my gosh, how could I forget the rats? They're so
Yes.
gross in the comics.
I know. So we meet Raphael, the king of the rats.
I love Raphael.
I love
Raphael's one of my
Raphael. I
favorites.
know.
I love him.
So this is when we find out that each master vampire has an animal they can call. And Nicolaus's is rats. So the were rats come and kind of meet up with Anita and pull her in. So they meet Nicolaus. Like I said, Nicolaus is the master of the city. She is Jean-Claude's master. And we find out she is 1,000 years old and a child vampire, which is always creepy, creepy, creepy.
So fucking creepy.
And the way they describe like the tinkling laughter, I'm just like, oh.
Yeah.
So she explains to Anita that there's way more vampires than the police are aware of that have been murdered, and 2 of them were very powerful vampires. We're introduced to another animator who pisses off Nicolaus. So she starts having temper tantrum, which we find out is really bad. So Jean-Claude has to like fight her back so that Anita can escape because it will kill humans. Anita escapes while she's running up the stairs to get out. She gets hit with magic blue flame. And the animator says, your eyes were glowing blue. So then we learn that Nicolaos can fly, which is a very rare power for the vampires. And when they emerge, they realize that they are under the Circus of the Damned, which is another vampire business and a literal circus, which I also wish was real because
Big
that would
time.
be very cool. We learn that holy water burns the vampires like acid and they can heal the damage pretty quickly. And this is when we learn that she is like infamous amongst the vampires and they call her the executioner. That's hers. And then we'll talk about Edward in a minute, but oh, he's actually next. He's called Death. So they have like
Mhm.
these nicknames. So when she gets home, we meet Edward. Yeah,
He's
you
my
like him.
favorite.
I know.
He was such an early favorite character for me. Like I loved, obviously I love Anita. Jean-Claude I was very suspicious of as
Okay,
soon
I
as the
felt that way
first
about
book.
Edward.
I immediately loved Edward. I
Okay.
thought he was either going to be a great villain of the series or he was going to end up being just like essentially what he has been so far. So again, I'm midway through the 8th book. And like he is so fascinating to me. And especially now that I'm into obsidian butterflies, I'm understanding a lot more. I don't know how deep into it you've gotten yet, but like, well, you've already read it, so what am I saying? But like, he said the whole soulmate speech,
Okay.
and I'm like,
And I
I
love
love
this idea. I love this idea that your soulmate doesn't necessarily mean your lover or your romantic
yeah,
partner. It's just that person that's like your perfect match.
yeah.
And I love that idea. And I do see it with the two of them, but it did take me a while to trust him.
No, I never trusted him. I just always
Yeah.
liked him.
Yeah.
No, I
So,
was very cautious of him, but I immediately liked him. I'm like, this is gonna be either like a great like fight scene for her later,
yes.
or they truly are gonna be like friends to the extent that they can both be friends. And I just always,
And I love how she's always saying, like, I fear the day when it comes down to Edward and I, and we have to finally find out who's better.
yeah.
Like, what a tenuous
And like,
relationship.
and that almost, and again, everything's blurring together, but that almost kind of has to happen because he's
Yeah.
like, hey, so I took a job where I should be hunting you.
Wasn't
Heads
that
up.
so good?
So good.
I
I'm
freaking
getting
love
way
that
ahead
part.
of us.
All right, yeah. So let's just say Edward, tall, blonde, muscular. He started his career as a hitman, but humans got boring. So now he's like a hitman for the supernatural, basically. So he's sort of her acquaintance, kind of like an
Yeah.
ally in the fact that they
Enemy.
run in the same circles.
You know,
But
every time, I mean, I know that she describes him as tall, and
yeah,
like this actor
but
isn't
to
necessarily
her,
that
like
tall.
everybody's
To Anita, everyone's tall. But every time I'm visualizing Edward, I think of James Marsters. And again,
okay.
it's because I'm a Spike girl, but just like light hair, the blue eyes, and I'm like, and like his cadence of speech, I'm like, if there were ever a live action,
Especially
James
for the one that you're
Marsters,
reading
so
now.
good for
I could
this.
definitely
Yes.
see that. I could see that, yeah. So yeah, as we've described, Edward is kind of like a hit for hire, but for preternatural creatures because he's too good for humans at this point. And the vampires call him Death. And he is there because he knows that she met the master vampire of the city and wants to know where the daytime resting place is. She lies and says that she doesn't know, and then she asks Edward for a sawed-off shotgun. He agrees to bring her one and explains he'll be back in a few days, expecting the information. So this is when we find out that Edward is pretty much always watching. And this happens many times where all of a sudden he's just like there. And this is where we meet Sigmund. This is where we find out Anita collects penguins. She has penguin stuffed animals, penguin coffee mugs, penguin sleep shirts, penguin calendars. That's her thing. So that night she dreams of Jean-Claude, and in the dream he says, I'm sorry, but I had to. And we'll get to that. So the next morning we meet Ronnie, which is her best friend. She's a private investigator and Anita's workout partner. And Veronica shows up for them to go work out and notes that Anita's eating breakfast, which is very weird for her. So just put a pin in that. We learn also that in this world, there are vampire hate slash pro-human groups. And one of them is called HAV, which is Humans Against Vampires. And she asks Ronnie,
I'm gonna pause you really quick. I'm gonna go get the door. I'll be right.
yeah, go. It's okay. I'll pour more. All right.
The good news is they both came here at once, so that should be the only like interruption I have to get up for.
Be like, listen, we are talking vampires.
And honestly, so Travis's mom would be the one to totally get it too. She's also a massive Buffy fan. So
Oh,
like I keep telling her to read this series.
obsessed, obsessed. Um, so this is when we find out that we have these anti-vampire pro-human groups. And the big one is HAV, Humans Against Vampires. And Anita says, Ronnie, can you look into them and make sure they're not connected to the murders? We also learn about the Church of the Eternal Life, which I thought was very interesting. This is a vampire church where you can join and then get turned. So the only church that can actually give you eternal life. And the master vamp who runs that is Malcolm. Put a pin in that. We learn that vampires do not eat food and that Anita was raised Catholic and has a very strong faith. Philip shows up at Anita's work, her day job, and tells her that Jean-Claude didn't come back the night before. And he explains that Nikolaos's punishment for vampires is to lock them in cross-wrapped coffins. The last vampire she did this to was in the coffin for 3 months and came out insane. Yikes. They have lunch, and Anita eats more than usual, including a blackberry pie, a fruit that she hates. Put a pin in that. Philip offers to help her investigate the vampire murders since anyone in the vampire scene would never talk to the executioner. They question the human partner of a murdered vampire, and she tells them that he was at a freak party the night he was murdered. So, a freak party is humans who are obsessed with vampires being fed on by vampires, and they sort of mean it's like a swingers party, but with humans and vampires. Like Philip, we talked about, he's a freak. He has been to freak parties before, and he tried to like kind of get away from it. He used to do the freak circuit, but he knows that two of the other murdered vampires were also in that circuit, so he does agree to take Anita to a freak party that night. Then we get another vampire business, which is Dead Dave's, a bar owned by a vampire who used to be a cop and got kicked out of the squad for being turned. We learn that vampires can be killed by a stake to the heart. Edward leaves a sawed-off shotgun in Anita's apartment with a note that warns Anita she has 24 hours to tell Edward the resting place of the master. It's just so sweet, I'll tell you.
So good. He's like the Easter Bunny, but
like
guns.
Easter Bunny. So Philip and Anita go to the freak party. In attendance is Edward, who is undercover as Ted. And we get to hear that name
I
many times.
forgot that was the first time we were Ted.
That's when, remember, the plump girl was like all over him. She's like, oh, you know Ted. Ted's here all the time. And Anita's like, oh, really?
And Edward's like, don't fucking say anything.
Right. He admits he's been to several, and Anita's now realizing how he gets his vampire information. She senses power from outside and knows that someone is attempting to raise the dead in the cemetery behind the house. So she goes outside and sees the animator who's working for Nikolaos is raising a zombie with a group of vampires. The animator is supposed to be raising a 100-year-old zombie, and Anita notes that he's holding a voodoo gree-gree bag, but he's still unable to raise the zombie. The vampires are going to kill him for failing, so Anita intervenes and helps Zachary, that's his name, raise the zombie by acting as a focus and sharing her power. So we learn that the older the zombie, the larger the sacrifice needed. In the midst of raising the zombie, Anita realizes that Zachary, the animator at her side, is not alive. He was resurrected. So he died. He'd been resurrected by somebody, but he's not technically a zombie and he's not technically a vampire because he's a resurrected necromancer. So the gree-gree around his wrist is actually keeping him alive, and it needs blood to work, which is why he's struggling to raise a zombie. Before Anita leaves, she runs into Nikolaos, and during the conversation, Anita mentions a small scar on the vampire and inadvertently lets the vampire know that her mind tricks are not working on Anita. Yikes.
Whoopsies.
I remember that scene. I was like, uh-oh.
Yep.
Later, Anita dreams of Jean-Claude eating blackberries and then is awakened by a call from Ripet. There's another dead vampire. At the scene, Anita recognizes the vampire, Teresa, who is Nikolaos's right-hand vampire. She meets with Ronnie, who has found out that the HAV is rumored to have a death squad to kill vampires. She visits the Church of the Eternal Life to talk to Malcolm. He recognizes that Anita has the first mark of a master vampire. So this is why we said put a pin in that. So the blue flame coming up the stairs was Jean-Claude marking her for the first time. In this world, if you get 4 marks from a master vampire, you are now their human servant, which means you are forever bound to the vampire, but you don't die as long as they stay alive, but you still are a human. So you can be out in the sun, you can eat, all that good stuff. So he has unknowingly marked her to become his human servant, and she is not happy.
Be pissed.
Oh, she mad.
She's
real mad. She receives a call letting her know that the vampires have grabbed Philip, and she heads to Nikolaos's lair under the Circus of the Damned to save him. When she arrives, she finds that Philip has been tortured. Nikolaos tells Anita that she has the second mark from Jean-Claude. At 4 marks, she becomes human servant. This was the blue flame that hit her on the first night. He's locked in a coffin and he's been feeding through Anita, which is why she's eating the blackberries and eating breakfast, having the dreams, because he is using her to sustain his power. Philip is killed in a
I was
horrible way.
devastated.
Horrible way. Awful.
It was so. I remember so vividly. So, like I said, I've been doing these in the audiobooks. I remember I could tell you where I was walking because I did go on long walks or like a run or something. I was on a long walk and I get to this point, and I remember the point in the sidewalk where I was when Philip died.
Awful. It's an awful death.
Devastating.
And she mentions it for many books.
Yeah,
Many
that
books.
sticks with her.
Yeah. And the reason that she's killing Philip is to show that anybody who's loyal to Jean-Claude can't be protected by Jean-Claude. Anita's knocked out, and when she awakens, she's in Jean-Claude's office at Guilty Pleasures, and Nicoleus has bit her. When leaving the club, she runs into Edward and agrees to tell him Nicoleus's location if he helps her kill Nicoleus. Edward helps her clean the bite, which sounds horrible, by the way. So if you're bit, you pour holy water on it, and it's like acid, and you have to keep doing it until it no longer burns. Sounds horrible. And he even said, he's like, you're supposed to do this over a matter of days. And she's like, nah, pour it on me. Sounds horrible. But if you don't clean it, then the vampire bite means that the vampires can control you. And you can tell it's clean if you touch across to the bite and it doesn't burn. Anita is lured into a cemetery with a fake job to find Zachary, Nicoleus's animator, finds out that he's the one that's been killing the vampires to feed his gree-gree and stay alive. He's been controlling the ghouls to kill. He flees, leaving ghouls to kill Anita and Edward, but they survive and meet up with Raphael. So the were-rats agree to help them sneak into Nicoleus's lair while she sleeps. We meet two more rats, Louis, who's important, and Lillian, also very important. Lillian is not just a were-rat, but she's a doctor. So quite often, she's the one who's called on when the supernaturals are hurt. The next day, while the sun is up, we go into Nicoleus's lair. And this is when we find out that during the day, the vampires are helpless. They're out. So unless they're old, and that means like 500 or older. We learn that silver nitrate injections can kill a vamp. A master's gaze can trap you until they let you go. And we also learn a shotgun blast to the head will kill a vampire. Good to know. Nicoleus awakes because she's 1,000. She is not in her coffin. Her and her human servant and Zachary all surprise them, but Edward and Anita are able to kill them. We don't need to talk about the drawn-out battle. Nicoleus is killed by being beheaded and stabbed in the heart with a sword. Zachary was killed by dripping living blood onto the gree-gree, which I thought was very cool.
That's super interesting.
And then real quick, Jean-Claude rescued from coffin. He's now master of the city, and she ends the book by saying, I am the executioner. I don't date vampires. I kill them. Irony. What do we think?
Little
That's
do you
the first
know.
one. That's the intro. So what was your thoughts after the first one? You were like, where's the second one?
Yeah, I was immediately hooked. I was surprised at how quickly I became very attached to all the characters. I mean, and again, like having a big character death in the first book for me, because Philip was important. He was driving a lot of the plot.
And he like sacrificed his own recovery to help her just to get pushed into the midst of all of this.
Yeah. And that was again surprisingly devastating, but I feel like part of the reason why I resonate with this series so much is the whole like arc of Anita from like where she starts to like where she even is now. And again, there's 30 books in the series, and I'm not even a third of the way done.
Yeah.
And like, but the change of her as a person that you're able to literally track throughout the series, because she says things in the first book like, I don't date vampires, I kill them. And some of the other little like prejudices and things that she has, how
and we
much
see
that
that with
changes.
Lily.
Yeah. And like, and why, and all of the why her opinions change and everything. I was like, getting that sample size of the first book, I was like, holy shit. I see so much of myself in Anita. I see like so many it's one thing for the main character to be good and someone that you can root for. It's another thing to have supporting cast of characters you actually give a shit about them.
Not only
There's
that, but like actually conjures actual feelings inside of you. Like we've been texting back and forth about somebody, and we'll get to him soon, but just like gives you actual like guttural reactions. And it's funny
yeah.
that you say that you see yourself in Anita. I actually read this and I'm like, I really need to be more like her. Like I really need to give less fucks because as often as she comes across kind of like as like a hard ass, it
Yeah.
also is how she gets through things. It's how she gets the respect, gets the job done, shuts people down. I'm just like, I really need to be more like her. I really do.
I mean, I always kind of preface my myself, especially like in social settings where I'm just like, I mean, I'm just mean. And if I'm nice to you, you earned that.
Yeah. I saw a thing the other day. It said, if you think I was flirting with you, I was just trying to be nice. If you think I was
Yeah.
weird and awkward, I was trying to flirt with you.
Precisely. No, but I feel like her strength and everything is stuff I absolutely strive for. I think what I mostly see in my of her in myself is more the transformation of her being a bit more prejudiced and having these different because like me at 21 versus me now at 31, we would not have been friends. And
Right.
so to watch her growth, I think it's very similar. Like if Anita book 8 could talk to Anita book 1, they wouldn't really be friends because she's like, what do you, if book 1 Anita could like look
Yeah,
at book
that's
8
so
Anita, they
interesting.
would not like each other.
Yeah, she'd be
And
like,
that's
you're
how
one
I
of the
see myself.
monsters.
Yeah, she's like,
Yeah.
what do you mean you're a necromancer? What do you mean you're
Yes.
dating a vampire? Like,
Yes.
what do you mean? Like, that's how I see myself. And
Totally. I
so
think she was very black and white in the beginning, and now she's more gray.
she's so gray now, and I love that. And I think
Yeah.
you start to get the book 1 in an absolute like, vacuum was a great standalone story. But the fact that it has expanded so much from there and she has had the room to grow so much is so cool. But if it would have just been a single book, I still would have been satisfied. And that to me is such a good indication of a first book of a series.
Yeah,
Because
totally.
like I don't necessarily want to have to buy into the whole story in book 1. Now book 2, yeah, leave it open-ended, do whatever you got to do. But like
Yeah.
I don't know, I like that book 1 could have been by itself and it would have been really, really good. I
Yeah.
love that it wasn't by itself, but
Yeah. 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 Yeah, I
but
agree with you. And I think that's interesting. And I think that Philip was necessary because so many times throughout the rest of the series, she's like, well, the last time I allowed a human in, you know?
yeah.
So she's already kind of starting to see herself as like the protector of humans, and
Mm,
maybe I'm not human.
yeah,
So the next ones get shorter because we don't have so much exposition.
right.
So the laughing corpse. This one was kind of silly, but
I
I'm
love
here
it
for
though.
it. I also love a world where, and this is the thing, it's like sometimes you get thrust into a world that's very fantasy and it's hard. Like Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, I was like, this is like homework reading this book. But she thrusts you in just like True Blood. Like
Mm,
you're thrust right in
yeah,
and you pick up real fast. And I love all of these creatures. And if
yeah.
I could have a master's in preternatural biology, I wish that
Sign
was
me up.
real.
Sign me up. It's funny you said True Blood because the way I've been describing is people are like asking like, oh, who's this character? And like, what is it that you're cosplaying? Or like, what is this book series you're so into? And I'm like, think True Blood meets a little bit of Buffy, but Jessica Jones.
That's so funny because I
That's
describe my books as think True Blood and Grey's Anatomy.
yes. Oh my God, yes. That
My
is
big selling point is because I'm a nurse, all the hospital stuff is accurate. The hot vampire sex I made up. That's my selling line.
it's so funny with your book too, as I'm reading it. As like again, because most of the reading, I'm right before I go to bed. So I'm sitting in bed reading your book, and I'm like, that was really thorough.
Yeah.
She had to be a nurse to write that.
Yeah. Because I'm really a nurse.
Like you're talking
When
about like
people
I'm gonna
find
train these
out,
and I'm gonna
when,
do this. And I'm just like, I bet you actually are. Like I bet you did that in your
yeah.
shift and then wrote that.
So the
Like
nurses read the book and they're like, oh, that's so, all of that is so accurate.
it's
Um,
so good.
yeah. When people find out that I have a doctorate in nursing, but I write smut, you're like, listen, I have layers, okay?
We all are just a weird onion.
Weird onion.
And yours is smut.
Right. I'll tell you where that doctorate has been helpful. When you're talking to like a real hot person, boy or girl, I don't care, and you get to
Mm.
be like, actually, it's Dr. Nazari. I'm just
See,
saying.
that's my goal.
That
I'm
goes
trying
so
to
hard.
soon. So that
It goes
is
so hard. Yeah.
actually Dr. Morel. Thank you.
Actually, Dr. Nazari, but that's fine. All right.
So
So the
good.
laughing corpse. So we find out that Anita's day job is at a place called Animators Inc., which I thought was so silly. I was so here for it. The owner's name is Bert, and Bert will do anything for money.
Bert's
Anything.
a car salesman wrapped up
Which
in.
I respect. Like he just you get what you see. So he asks Anita to meet with a very rich man named Gaynor who wants a 300-year-old corpse raised. Anita declines and says, "You would need a white goat." And we find out a white goat means human sacrifice. Gaynor's like, "Yeah, no problem. I have a list." And she's like, "No, no, no, no." Then she's called to a crime scene by Rip It. I want to make us Rip It badges, by the way.
Yes, please.
It is a family, and they have been mutilated slash ripped apart. A 3-year-old boy is missing from the home, and she explains to Dolph that it's possibly a zombie raised and controlled by another, but that's a very rare ability. Only her mentor Manny, and an animator named Peter Burke could do it, but the last guy just died, so it's not him. And then one more person comes to mind, but she doesn't want to tell Dolph yet. So this is when we're introduced to Senora Dominga Salvador. She is the most powerful voodoo priestess Anita's ever met. Anita meets up at her house along with Manny. We learn that Manny used to be in voodoo and that he met his wife and became a Christian. But before that, he worked with Dominga and was not only her priest, but also her lover.
Ooh,
Manny. And
dog.
he warns Anita, do not get on her bad side. We learn that this is when we learn that Anita is 24, half Mexican, half white. Her mother died when she was very young. She was raised by her stepfather and her stepmother, Judith. Judith is very white. Her children are very white. They're not super psyched about Anita. Now, if that's the truth or Anita's perception, we never truly find out.
Mm-mm.
But Anita feels like they don't accept her. They don't approve of Anita's career choices, definitely. And Anita's maternal grandmother was a voodoo practitioner. So she does have a background in voodoo. She kind of understands it, but the Mexican voodoo specifically. Dominga
Yeah.
shows them that she's able to capture the souls of the dead and put them into zombies, then prevent the zombies from degrading. How horrifying was that scene?
Terrifying.
That girl was just like staring at Anita, like, please help me. Horrible. She's like
Dark,
trapped.
dark. I
Oh,
love how unafraid this series is to go real, real dark.
oh yeah. And I
There's
remember
some
this
like
is the
almost like
90s.
for dark, and I
There was like
love
a
it.
lot of stuff that happened in the 90s that, well, no, they're writing some pretty messed up stuff now.
Yeah.
Anita says, oh, so Dominga asks Anita to join her, and she says, like, between you and me, we could make these creatures for profit, essentially setting up like human sex slaves, like zombie sex slaves. And Anita's
Yeah.
like, no. Anita says, hell no. This insults Dominga, who says, I'm going to send something to you, and tells Anita that Manny used to be involved in human sacrifice. Now, Manny is Anita's like mentor. She's known him for
That's her
years.
photo.
That's like her father figure. So she is very upset about this. Anita and Manny are chased out of the house by one of Dominga's creatures. Manny warns Anita that Dominga does not make idle threats and that she would be very hard to kill. We then learn Anita has a black belt in judo. And then Gaynor's bodyguard visits Anita. And Gaynor's like, he's now offering you $1.5 million. And Anita's like, still no. She goes to Peter Burke's funeral, and we learn that her mom died when Anita was 8. We meet John Burke, who is Peter's brother, and John is a voodoo practitioner from New Orleans. So we add him to the suspect list because he would be powerful enough to control a zombie. The little boy from the crime scene is found dead, and Anita's called to see it. She still thinks it's a zombie, but it doesn't seem to be acting like the normal kind. So she warns Dolph to have flamethrowers on hand for when they find it. And this is when we meet Irving. Irving is a werewolf reporter. Now, only Anita knows that he's a werewolf. He's in hiding at work. She asks him for info on Gaynor, and he agrees to meet her in an hour at Dead Dave's with the info, but he wants info on the new vampire master. And Anita says, no way, but I'll owe you one. At Dead Dave, she's told by the bartender that the master has sent word to all of the vampires and freaks. If you see Anita Blake, tell her to come talk to me. Yikes. She meets with Irving and gets a massive file about Gaynor. We learn that he likes to date women with disabilities. And only a few weeks ago, he was dating a sex worker named Wheelchair Wanda, who hangs around the dangerous area of the city in a place called the Tenderloin. While walking to the car, Anita and Irving are approached by Jean-Claude, and he said, "Everyone knows that you are my human servant, so if I don't get you under control, it hurts my control of the city." Anita's pissed, but agrees to meet him at the Laughing Corpse the next night. Because Irving witnesses the exchange, he's now figured out that Jean-Claude is the master of the city. Jean-Claude agrees to an interview. Anita leaves the men to talk. She's not happy about it, but she remembers.
I think your audio cut out. Hello?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
I punched the mic because I'm a hand talker.
Not happy about it, and the microphone turned off.
Yeah. He returns to the cemetery where the little boy has been found. Dolph and two cops with flamethrowers. She uses her power to sense an empty coffin in the ground and knows that this is where someone has been risen. She grabs dirt from the gravesite and says she'll take it to a clairvoyant named Evans. The headstone is gone, so they don't have a name, so she takes a small piece of the marble left behind. This is when we meet Evans, aka the saddest character in this book.
Yeah.
He's on retainer from Rip It, but he's been driven almost mad by the things he sees because he's a clairvoyant. So he agrees to touch the stone, and he sees visions of blood and someone having a woman's throat slit, then her blood smeared on a tombstone. She's wearing a charm bracelet with bows and arrows and hearts, and then he screams, refuses to touch anything else, says, "Get the fuck out of my trailer, never come back here again." I was like heartbroken for this character.
Yeah.
That night, Anita is attacked in her apartment by two zombies sent by Dominga. The police arrive and are able to destroy both zombies. She tells Dolph her suspicions and he says, "Give me 48 hours to get a warrant." The penguins are covered in blood.
Okay, so
She has to soak
I have
them
to
in the
talk about this
bathtub.
scene. I have to talk about this scene because another reason why I am so connected and obsessed with Anita Blake is that aside from dogs, penguins are my all-time favorite animal,
What
which is
about
the reason why
ours?
my brother bought me the comic. And so I also have for a 31-year-old woman, I have a stupid amount of penguins with animals. And so reading this scene where like her favorite, like Sigmund, has like blood on his belly, I know how like horrible I would feel if like something like that happened to one of my favorites.
And then she's
And
like
so
soaking in the tub, and it just makes it worse.
yeah, I felt for her so much because like all of this like horrible stuff she's witnessing and all these horrible crimes and those preternatural like blood and gore and blood and murder.
Yeah.
And she's like, I just want my penguin to be clean. And that was so like, I don't know, wholesome and just devastating. And like I felt for her so bad in this moment. And I'm like, me too, Anita. I also don't want blood in Sigmund. Like,
I
oh, I was
know.
so upset.
I think it's the one thing she has that's not awful. Like
Yeah.
everything she does in her life is just horrible. So she comes to her little apartment with her good coffee and her penguin stuffed animals, and now that's been ruined.
Yep.
So yeah, I felt for her. And I know I've tried to put stuffed animals like in a sink. It just makes it so much worse.
So much worse.
The next night, she goes to the Laughing Corpse, which is a nightclub in the Vampire District with zombies as punchlines and vampire staff. And Willie is the manager because he's in good with Jean-Claude because he helped Anita in the first book. So he's like, he's in his zone. He's the manager. During the show, a human stand-up comedian is grabbed by a zombie, and Anita actually uses her powers to calm the zombie and then asks a coworker, Charles, to go with her to the Tenderloin to find Wheelchair Wanda since it's not safe alone. She meets up with Jean-Claude, who owns the club. He tells her he can sense her lust. Ooh, which she admits, but she also explains it doesn't mean she's going to sleep with him. He makes it clear that he desires her too. She continues to deny him, and he starts to call her ma petite. which will stick out through the whole rest of everything.
Stop calling me my fucking petite is one of my favorite
She
lines in the whole series.
hates it. Hates it.
It's so funny.
She says, fuck you. And he says, I've already offered you that. So good.
So good.
So he's explaining, like, now that I'm master, everybody's challenging my position, and it's made worse by the fact that everyone knows that you are my human servant and I can't control you. He can't force the third mark on her. So the third and fourth mark have to be done voluntarily. He asks her, just pretend, stand behind me at meetings. And this leads to Anita believing that the marks weren't a spur of the moment choice, but he actually planned to mark her to make her his like hired gun so that he could establish control in the city. She says, wipe me clean of the marks. He says, no. Then we find out Anita has killed 14 vampires at this point. Or I'm sorry, 18 vampires. It was 14 before, now it's 18. And she says, I'd rather die trying to kill you than ever submit to you. Is that
What?
true, though?
So about that, honey. I just
About. Can I just say how good the tension building is in this series? We're not gonna ruin it.
the slow burn is
I even
phenomenal.
sent you the text. I was like, finally. Charles has to back out because his kids are sick. So she begrudgingly asks Jean-Claude to take her, and we learn that the Catholic Church sees vampires as suicides. They find Wanda and take her to Anita's place, and we learn that vampires need to be invited in. So there's another rule that we learn. Wanda hates vampires, does not like Jean-Claude. So they use this to their advantage, and then they learn that what Gaynor wants. So Gaynor is the descendant of thieves and whores, as they say. And he wants someone to raise his ancestors to tell him where their treasures are, because he feels like he has the right to it. When Wanda and Jean-Claude are gone, she checks her voicemail, and there's another family that's been murdered, and John Burke wants to talk to her. At the crime scene, this is one of my favorite scenes. Anita and another cop play Who's the Strongest by trying to gross each other out. That was such a good scene. I loved that scene. Because that's what humor is like in the hospital, too.
Yeah, and like any scene where she gets to kind of like show up one of the guys and she's like, please take me seriously. This is really annoying. But then she also embarrassed them is like my
They're
favorite.
like pulling out intestines and like moving. So good.
So gross.
Good.
I loved it.
Anita meets up with John at the morgue to look at his brother's last effects, and in the bundle is a gree-gree with human finger bones and human hair. He says someone died to make this, and there is no way that Peter would do it. The gree-gree is someone sharing their power. If they can get the bag near the actual owner, it will crawl back to them. The bag has the same musical charm that the clairvoyant saw in his vision. So Anita now knows where the woman went. She tells John she believes Dominga helped Peter make the gree-gree and tells him he can come search Dominga's house with her and the cops. When they do, this is the coolest scene. They put the gree-gree on the floor and it crawls to Dominga, which is so freaking cool. So she admits it to Anita but denies anything else. And then when they go to use the gree-gree for evidence, it's disappeared. It like melds back into her body.
It's cool.
It's
so good, but it's so gross.
This is another good scene. They hunt for the killer zombie and they find it. Remember, she finds it in the trash can. And it like talks to her. It's like, I don't want to be here. Anita realizes that
like,
he was an animator or a voodoo practitioner, which is why when he got raised, they lost control of him. The zombie was eating flesh to regain his memory, and he begs Anita to put him to rest. The cops kill the zombie, but Anita is hurt and taken to the hospital. She's given pain meds, and an officer drives her home, where she is kidnapped by Gaynor's bodyguards, and they trank her when she's already full of narcs. So she's down for like 2 days. She's awakened by Gaynor, who tells her they've tortured Wanda, and she's confessed it all. He threatens Anita if she doesn't raise the zombie for him. Then he says, we're using Wanda as the white goat. Dominga is there. She helped Peter raise the zombie for Gaynor, but since she fucked up, now Gaynor doesn't trust her anymore. She says, use the magic to compel her to raise the zombie. The plan is to use Wanda as the human sacrifice. Dominga has created a monster with all the mini parts. Remember, it was like a whole bunch of people all melded into one big creature, which is
Yeah.
so messed up.
Reminded me of like the thing. It was just
Oh.
like just this like goop of
And there
personhood.
was
And I
like
just
animals sticking out of it and stuff too. And it was like walking towards her. So Anita ends up raising the entire cemetery and commands all the zombies to kill the bad guys, then lays them all to rest. So now there's no sign of Dominga or Gaynor. There's never evidence of the crime. Because one of the things we learn is that death by magic is immediate execution in this world. So if you're a
Mhm.
witch, a necromancer, a voodoo practitioner, anything, and you use magic to hurt a human, done. Immediate. There's not even a trial. You're immediately put down. So that was Laughing Corpse. That was an action-packed one.
It was a good one. It was
Hmm.
a very, very good one. I really liked how how Laurel incorporated voodoo.
Yes.
Because even through the first book, I was kept thinking, I was just like, huh, so this is in St. Louis. I just wonder like what other like Anita like people would be doing in other cities or like in other cultures. And so for them to for the series to have like the voodoo angle for me, I thought was super interesting. I wish we got more Manny through the
Yeah.
whole series. I like Manny.
I like Manny.
Um, yeah, I feel like there's a lot of that with some of the side characters that are introduced in this series. There's like they're such full, well thought out characters, and we just don't see them enough.
Yeah.
Um, and I think Manny is one of those characters that I wish we got more Manny.
Yeah.
But
And I
Dominga
think
was a great villain because she was
Dominga
just a
was a
straight up villain.
great villain.
I love a villain for the sake of being a villain. Like they don't need to have a redemption arc. They don't need all this other crap. I just want a bad guy, and she was a good bad guy.
She was a great bad guy. And we couldn't really describe it because of time, but she had like all these henchmen around her house. She was just like in a suburb. And there was
Mm,
like a little girl on a tricycle outside and like these like it was such a good character. And she just looks like someone's
yeah.
grandma.
Yeah, that's what I was literally about to say. I'm like, she's just someone's grandma
Yeah,
who just is like, incredibly powerful voodoo priestess. Like, could be like just your next door neighbor. Like, oh, how you doing, Mrs. Smith? How are the grandkids?
I know.
And then she has like horrible creature in her base. It's so good. It's so good.
It's so good. And the idea of like the Frankenstein nature of like, oh, I just want to know if I can meld 12 people all together and make a monster. And then she trapped all their souls inside of it,
Yeah,
which is
evil.
horrible.
Evil for the
Horrible.
sake of being evil. And it's just makes for a good like sequel villain. Because
Well,
don't get me wrong, I love a sympathetic villain. I love like an anti-hero kind of villain. But sometimes having just like I don't want to say monster of the week type villain, but that kind of villain is just it feels good sometimes. Just
yeah.
beat the bad guy because they're bad.
Yeah. And I think that it is necessary in this world to show how. So, this is the thing I always say is like the hero is only as awesome as the villain.
Yes.
So, one of the big mistakes authors make is they write this amazing hero, but then the villain is so weak that you're just like,
Yeah.
I mean, I could take that person out. So, you
Hmm.
need the villain to really be something. You know, like you need the
Yeah.
villain to make the hero nervous, or else the hero's
Hmm.
not heroic. And
Yeah.
Dominga is one of the best villains in this book.
Yeah.
And those I don't want to say killings, but the way that she wipes out Gaynor and Dominga at the end gets mentioned in many books because Dolph
Yeah.
keeps saying like this is where Dolph starts to suspect that she's up to something outside of the law,
Yeah.
but he can't prove it.
Right.
Yeah.
And as the series goes on too, I appreciate Dolph more and more.
Yes.
I think he's a really fun side character.
Yes.
He's one of the, and it's hard to write a character like this. And I've only seen a couple of instances where there've been really good characters written like this, of a lawful good character that isn't boring.
Yes. Uh-huh.
That is hard to do.
Yeah.
Like one of my favorite examples of like, oh, sorry, my cat is trying to take my laptop. One of my favorite examples of this is like Okoye from Black Panther. That is
Yeah.
a lawful good character, but she's
Yeah.
interesting. And that's how Dolph reads to me.
Yeah. And they
My
really
pit bull
allude
can.
to the fact that like being assigned to Rip It is a punishment. So she says
Mhm.
multiple times, like, I wonder what he did. But then he takes
Yeah.
over this squad that was meant to be a joke and like turned it into a
Something
crack force,
incredible.
and now he's being asked to like speak at the FBI on preternatural crimes. So
Mm,
I would love a prequel about Dolph. Like, what is his
yes.
story? Where did
It'd
he
be
come
so
from?
good.
Because there's
Yeah.
also times when we'll get to this, but he kind of starts to talk to her almost like a daughter he's disappointed in, and she has to say like,
Yes.
"You're not my dad."
Yeah.
But this is
Yeah.
the moment where he's like, "Bodies don't just disappear."
Hmm.
Yeah. So this takes us into
Their
Circus of the
relationship
Damned.
is so interesting,
It's
and I
such a
love
good
it.
relationship.
And that is one thing that I think is well written in this series too, is that like not every male character is like a love interest type character.
Yes.
Like I love that Anita has characters like Dolph, like Edward, like some of the characters we meet later that are just like they're just professional friends or they're just
Correct.
friends.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that this series takes seriously like male female friendships and that not everything is like I only have girlfriends 'cause I'm a girl. It's
Yeah.
like no, she has reliable men in
And
her
also,
life
not
to
every
walk her to
guy's
sleep
trying
with
to
her.
bang you. Sometimes they genuinely respect you.
Exactly.
Yeah. Remind me to touch on that when you're done reading my first book, because I don't want to say anything.
Okay.
Circus of the Damned is one of my favorites, by the way. It's
Yes.
not the favorite, but it is one of my favorites. So I was really excited to go back to it, especially because we open on Halloween season. So I'm always like, yes. And then
So
we find
good.
out that Halloween season is like Bert's biggest moneymaker. So
Mhm.
he's having her do 5 corpses a night. So the other
Insane.
animators can only do 3. She's doing 5 a night. And Bert has her meeting with 2 men from HAV who want the name and resting place of the master. And she's like, you can fuck right off. Then she gets called to a crime scene where a man has been attacked by multiple vampires. And this is not common that they travel in packs and attack like that. So this is when we find out that normally when a person is bit by a vampire and dies from that, it takes them 3 nights to rise, but the night that you see them counts as one. So in 2 more nights, the that normally a victim would rise, but because it is multiple bites, he will not rise as a vampire. So it has to be from one. They have to bite you and drain you, and then you rise 3 days later. So that's important to know for a vampire
Mhm.
podcast, not for the books. Um, so she calls up Jean-Claude and says, "Are there any rogue packs in the area?" And he's like, "Well, nice to talk to you too." And she's like, "Fuck off, Jean-Claude. I'm asking a question." So she agrees to go meet with him at the Circus of the Damned because our Jean-Claude is very playful. He's got all
I
the time in the world.
love
He
him.
never answers a question directly. It's always like a big thing. And as a
At
woman
first he
who's
like
always in a hurry, I'm like, oh my God, answer the question.
yeah, like when I was first reading this, I was like, all right, Jean-Claude, like stop. She's not interested. And now I'm at where I'm at, and I'm like,
It
oh. But
worked.
like
It worked
it worked. And
because he
that's
knows what he's doing.
it's so I feel like I'm gonna have to take a shot. Like your listeners are gonna take a shot every time I say so good and get drunk within 10 minutes of this podcast. But like it is just so good because I love that it was just not like an immediate thing.
Mhm.
And what I love too about like even the first book that is like that kind of had it established to like now especially, they had like a working relationship before Guilty Pleasures. They had
Yeah.
met before.
Yep.
Like and it wasn't just like I met him and oh my God, ugh,
No,
and now we're lovers.
no. When we
It's
meet
like
him in the
no, I've
first
always
book,
hated this guy.
she's like, oh God, it's Jean-Claude. He thinks he's so
She's like
pretty.
not again. And it's just so this was like genuinely, even before we meet Anita and Jean-Claude, this is years in the making.
I know.
And
And the
it's
balls it takes as a
fantastic.
vampire to go after the executioner. He's like, you,
So,
you.
so good. Take a shot, listeners. So good. Like I just
And guess what? I would have fallen day one. I got to hold out more. I got to hold out more. All right. So this is when
man,
we meet. Are we ready? This is when we meet
ready.
Stephen. How do we feel about Stephen? It's so hot in here. I got to crack a window.
Uh,
I'm
I
talking about all
mean,
these hot men, and I'm just like, oh,
yeah, yeah.
What do we think about
Yeah.
Steven?
I mean, I'll be completely honest with you. I'm trying to remember the full plot line of Steven.
So when we first meet Steven, all we know is lycanthrope, because that's the other thing. She can sense lycanthropes. They have like
That's
a
right.
vibration. And we know that he works
That's
for
right.
Jean-Claude. Jean-Claude
Yeah.
now owns the circus. Steven, of course, is super hot and
So hot.
just so flirty, like
Yeah.
so sexual all the time.
Yeah.
And in the show, we see a Lamia. So this is when we get to meet a Lamia.
That's right.
Right. So in this world,
Coming back to me now.
yep, the Lamia, she is the last of its kind because they were supposed to be extinct because Anita has a master's in preternatural biology. So she's well versed in all of this. And a Lamia, for anyone who doesn't know, is half woman, half snake. Very, very old. This goes way back to like Greek mythology. And she goes to find Jean-Claude in his bedroom, and in the bed is a human man with wavy brown hair just past his shoulder, tan skin, all muscle. We don't have a name yet. She finds Jean-Claude is still attempting to woo Anita into being his willing human servant, lover, or both. She's challenged by a vampire named Yasmin and her human servant Marguerite, and we learn that a cross-touching vampire flesh will heat up, light up, burn them and anyone it's touching. So Marguerite, or I'm sorry, Yasmin slams her chest into Anita. The cross burns both of them. So now they're both
Yeah.
burned. So that's important to know. While this is happening, the giant cobra and the circus show is out of control. It attacked and killed the handler. So the vampire Steven, the man from the bed, and Anita all run into the circus to take down the cobra, save the audience. The police arrive, and we learn that the sexy man from the bed is.
Richard.
Everyone take a drink.
Take a drink.
Oh, Richard. We've all known a Richard.
I've married a Richard.
Oh, no.
I divorced a Richard.
Did you? Oh, we'll have to talk off podcast.
Oh, honey.
Great on paper. So I will
Horrible
just tell you without
no
ruining
pun
anything,
intended.
because we'll get to it. I don't remember what I thought about Richard when I first read the book, because that would have been in
Yeah.
the 90s. But
I initially liked him. You know what's funny?
Everyone
So with
does.
Richard, I initially loved him. In Circus of the Damned, I loved him. You know what's really upsetting and fucking funny now
What?
is so Richard is obviously a middle school,
Right.
science
So we're going to
teacher.
talk about this. He's a middle school, junior high science teacher. He studied preternatural biology in college, just like Anita. He's a good friend of Steven's. He knows just as much about were animals as Anita knows about zombies. He explains that the rights for lycanthropes is his passion, since the last lycan to be a teacher was firebombed by scared parents.
Yeah.
So I was
And
like,
what's
oh, what a good guy.
as I'm listening to all of his like initial beginnings in Circus of the Damned, I remember I went for a walk and I was listening to the book, and I get back and I'm telling my partner, who is a middle school history teacher,
Is
and I was like,
he?
she has a boyfriend in this book, or this guy that she might date. I don't know, but and I like they started like seeing each other, and I was just like, oh my God, my favorite character, like my favorite book, she's dating like this, guy. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so much like her. And then I'm like, wait, never mind. Later.
And he's got like the longish hair. Yeah, I know. No, he's
And my partner has long hair and a beard, and I'm like, oh no.
no.
And I'm like, never mind, you're not a Richard.
But we
You're not a
all
Richard. You're
fell
not a
for
Richard.
Richard in the beginning. I'm just saying.
We all did.
Jean-Claude senses that Anita is attracted to Richard, and he does not like it. Later that night, Richard asks Anita on a caving date. Okay. But
Outdoorsy.
yeah, she has a Halloween party that day, so she asks him to be her date to the party, and then they'll cave the next date. So 2 dates. She's committed to 2 dates. Edward shows up. Edward's back. He wants the identity of the new master. He was following her that night and knows that one of the vampires she was with must be the new master. Anita convinces him otherwise, but knows eventually Edward's gonna figure it out. While working out the next morning, Ronnie knows the name of the first vampire victim. He was part of HAV. That night, there's another victim, a woman, and while they're examining the body, rigor mortis disappears and the woman starts to show signs of rising as a vampire. This was such a cool scene. So, as a vampire rules podcaster, I was just like, it was so well described. She said, wait a second. Did she look that healthy 2 minutes ago? And they were like, I thought you said that she can't rise. And she's like, I thought she couldn't. So she knows she's made a mistake. She calls the morgue where the first victim is, and there's no answer. This is such a good scene. She calls her boss, Bert, who's been paging her all day, and she's been ignoring it. And she finds out two important things. One, Bert has hired a new animator named Larry.
I love Larry.
He's taking her first 2 reanimations for the night. 2, there's an emergency vampire staking at the morgue that was called in hours before. We find out there is a new federal initiative that will, for those who will rise as a vampire, where there's a vampire mentor waiting for them to help usher them safely into new existence, which I thought was so cool. There's like a big brother,
Super
big
well thought
sister.
out.
Yeah. Anita explains to Dolph that the victim will rise as an animalistic since they're bitten by many vampires, and the vampire counselor is not going to be strong enough to stop them. At the morgue, it's a bloodbath. This was the coolest scene where they arrive and it's like dead quiet and there's like flicking lights and there's like blood on the wall. And I was just like, oh my God, so good. It was very like Resident Evil. I could just picture it. Several security guards, the vampire counselor, and hospital personnel are all dead. John is there. John Burke came back from the second book. He's trying to kill the vampire, and after a fight, Anita's able to do it. So she goes to the cemetery for the 3rd reanimation on her list and sees the new guy, Larry, is doing it. It's his 3rd in the night, and he's losing control, so she helps him control the zombie by adding her power. Larry is young with red curly hair, freckles, and blue eyes. He's the same height as Anita. He's 20 years old, and this is his internship from college. She senses he's very powerful but needs trained, and after they lay the zombie to rest, everyone is gone. Anita and Larry have to run from attackers. Anita shoots one, and they jump into the car to flee. She notices one of the men attacking them is the man from HAV who was looking for the master of the city. While driving, here we go, they hit a child on a bicycle, so they get out of the car to check, and it's a trap. They are attacked by a group of vampires. The child on the bike was a vampire. He has a knife. And we know that the oldest one in the group is named Alejandro. He's older than Jean-Claude. Anita and Larry have to fight. Larry is bitten by one of the female vamps. Alejandro senses that Anita has 2 marks and offers to slay her master and free her, but she knows this will make him master of the city. She knows this vampire group is probably the one killing humans. They're saved by HAV because the people are still nearby. Anita realizes Larry's ultimate goal is to be a vampire hunter like her. She's not happy about it, but she's going to train him. At home, Edward is back. He's just like in her house all the time. He asks why she's all banged up. I know. Just give him a key already.
Right.
She tells the story of what happened that night, but she's altering one truth. She tells him Alejandro is the master of the city. Jean-Claude comes to Anita in a dream, and she still resists, and then she's awakened by Irving. HAV is telling the news that they saved Anita Blake from vampires. It's all over the news. The man from HAV from the first meeting calls. He wants to meet with her, and she says fine, because he says he has a good plan for killing the master, and they go to meet someone named Mr. Oliver. Do you remember Mr. Oliver?
I do remember Mr. Oliver because he was creepy.
He's 1,000,000 years old. So he's like Cro-Magnon or whatever, however old that is. He's a caveman.
Yeah.
He believes vampires shouldn't be legalized, and he wants to know who the master of the city is. Anita says, let me think about it. And while she's there, she meets the Lamia. And the Lamia is the last of its kind. Later, she's asked by Mr. Oliver. Later, she's asked to meet up again with Mr. Oliver. They go to a remote location to have a second meeting with Mr. Oliver, but she's ambushed by the Lamia and Alejandro. It's a trap. And Alejandro marks her. So she's been marked by 2 vampire masters, which is not supposed to be possible. She's willing to protect Jean-Claude, but then he gives her the 3rd mark, and she's so freaked out by this, she tells Mr. Oliver that he is the master and where he sleeps. As soon as she does it, she finds out Do you remember?
I
Oliver
don't
wants to
remember.
take over the city and have all the humans slaughtered in one night so that
That's
vampires will
right.
be made
Yeah.
illegal again. Yep.
Yeah. One thing I had a thought.
Go.
Um, oh, I had it and I lost it. It could be the wine.
Mr. Oliver, Alejandro. She says Alejandro's the master.
It'll come back to me. Keep going. I'm sorry.
Okay. So she calls Jean-Claude and she's like, I fucked up. They're on their way. So he says, you really do want me dead, don't you? And she's like, I'm sorry, I fucked up. So he says, I'll try and fix this, but you may have messed up too bad this time. You need to come to the Circus of the Damned.
That was my thought. So one thing I really, really, really love about this series is how unafraid the author was to make Anita incredibly flawed. There are so many moments in this series where I'm like, ooh, that wasn't the right decision, but I'm glad she made wrong decisions because that made
Yeah.
her so much more relatable. And I really like just how imperfect Anita is. And
Yeah.
she's still such a good main character you can root for. That
Yeah.
was my thought.
Her problem is she needs to take accountability when she fucks up. Like she has a very hard
Yeah.
time admitting.
Hmm.
So she goes to the Circus of the Damned and she's brought Edward as backup. She's like, come on, come with me. We're going to kill a ton of vampires. And he's like, yes, I'm in. It's Halloween. So they're all in costume, which I think is incredible. And they have made this gentleman's agreement. So Jean-Claude and Oliver are going to battle it out, but in the ring of the circus with a bunch of people watching. So it's a show. And whoever wins gets to be in charge of the city. And then we come to find out that whoever loses will be staked by Anita. So after this giant battle, everybody needs to just go read the book. I'm telling you. After this
I love
amazing
how
battle,
theatrical it is. It's
oh,
just
it's so good.
like,
Jean-Claude is bested. So he's laid out and she has the opportunity to stake him. And instead she turns and stakes Oliver. So Alejandro's killed. She blacks out. She wakes up in the hospital. It's been like 4 days. And now she is free of all the marks. So Jean-Claude's and Alejandro's. So we go into the fourth book knowing she is not tied to Jean-Claude in any way, shape, or form. She is free. How did you feel after Circus of the Damned? You were like, just kiss already.
kind of. And I love this one. Mostly because, and again, this goes back to some side characters need more love in the series. I love Larry. I love Larry so much. He's such a puppy, and I
I
just
know.
want to protect him and love him forever.
Yes.
He is such a well-written like sidekick for
Yes.
Anita. Like she so desperately needed that kind of a sidekick.
Totally.
And I didn't know how much she needed him. At first I was kind of annoyed with him. I was
Yeah.
like, all right, kid, like get out of the way. I was anticipating it being another Philip situation, but
Yeah.
I was less emotionally invested at first. And then as the series has gone on, he's been in it a little bit more. I'm like, no, but I love Larry.
Yeah.
I was prepared to like, okay, I'm not gonna like him. I'm gonna be annoyed with him
Yeah.
because she's gonna kill him off. She's gonna introduce like a little brother character and just kill him off so I can get that attached.
Listen,
Unattached. And I love
never
Larry.
get attached to anybody in this world, by the way. But I had to keep reminding myself that they're like 4 years apart. She's
Yeah.
24 years old.
Yeah.
Think about that. 24.
Mhm.
That is very young. That's very young.
Yeah. Very, very young. And for her to have like a little like Padawan with her that was like almost like her age
Yes.
is just so cute.
Yes.
I love Larry. And what I liked this as the introduction of Richard. Much as we have feelings about Richard, I love that this was the introduction to the character because it let it feel natural.
Yeah.
That you're not gonna just like meet someone and then immediately fall in love.
Right.
I like that even with similar to Jean-Claude, she resisted
Yep.
and
And
she was
she
like,
even says like the
no.
last human that was in my circle was killed because of Philip. And she's very, very
Exactly.
worried about that. But there is a part of her that just wants something normal in her life. And she
Yeah.
really, really holds on to him. And I think that's why he becomes such a hard thing to
Killer.
let go of. Yeah.
Yeah, like a pillar in her life.
She just cannot let go of it because I think for a
Mm-mm.
little while that was her one life raft in this big ocean of insanity, and she just
That was her tether.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I love the immediate jealousy that is sensed between both the men too. I mean, obviously we get more insight with it with Jean-Claude because we know more about Jean-Claude at this point. But like I love the immediate kind of pissing contest.
I'll tell you, this is my biggest issue. And Anita, this is where sometimes I'm like, maybe I am as jaded as Anita because so again, I'm now rereading this. It's been a good amount of time. I'd say at least 5 years. So I go
Hmm.
back, I reread it, and I'm just like, I don't think that I would be, I actually think she's a little more patient with them than even I would be at this point.
Oh yeah,
There is a
totally.
part of me that's just like, Anita.
Yeah. But then I think
Red
about like
flag, red
again,
flag, red flag, red flag, red
yeah.
flag.
But then I remember myself in my early to mid 20s when I
Yeah.
was married. And I'm just like, yeah, I would have put up with that as a 24-year-old. I would have. At 31, there's no chance.
All
Yeah.
right. So let's do book 4. And then we're hitting 2 hours. So if you want to break this into a second session, I completely understand.
Yeah, let's just do the next book and then call it because I have
Okay. I know you have people waiting for you. So we'll do
yeah.
this and then we will set up a time to record the second half, but we'll get this out for
Perfect.
this Sunday. Okay. All right.
Perfect.
This is another good one. This is the Lunatic Cafe. Do you remember this one?
I do. I
Yeah,
really
yeah,
like this
yeah.
one.
Yeah, this is a good one.
This might be one of my favorites, honestly.
Yeah, so this I have to give the synopsis. I have to give a shout out to the Anita Blake wiki because the next 3 novels I listened to when I was on my way to New Orleans and on my way home.
Mm.
So I was driving. So the Lunatic Cafe opens with Anita interviewing a potential client, George Smits. He tells Anita that his wife Peggy has disappeared. Anita explains that she is not trained as an investigator and suggests that George contacts the police, but he does not want to because his wife Peggy is a werewolf. He is afraid if he contacts the police, she owns and operates a butcher shop, and if it comes out to the public, she's going to
Butcher your mic.
There we go. I see what you did there. That was a good joke. I gotta stop waving my arms. There's a
No, you're
huge
good.
prejudice out there for were animals. She's around food, so he doesn't want it to come out. So Anita says, okay, go to my friend Ronnie. She's a private investigator, and he goes to meet with her that night. Anita is on her way on a date with Richard. It's Christmas
Ooh.
time. They're going to see Guys and Dolls. Um, they run into Jean-Claude at the theater, which I don't
I
think
love this scene so
much.
much.
It's so passive
Again,
aggressive.
this is one of those scenes where I remember so vividly where I was listening to it. I was at the gym doing my warm-up stretching,
Yeah.
and I was like, "Oh
Yeah.
my God."
Yeah. So we forgot
Like,
to
get out the rulers,
mention
boys. Like,
at the end of the third book, it is revealed that Richard is a werewolf. We forgot to mention that part. That's kind of important.
whoops.
So he is not a human. He's actually one of the best at hiding it. Anita never knew until he had to show himself to fight. And so she's trying to come to terms with the fact that he's a werewolf, and she's kind of doing okay with it. Jean-Claude shows up like in the theater of the in the lobby theater, which is not a coincidence. I don't care what he
I love it
says.
so much. He's
And
such a
he just
dick. I
like
love it.
lets it slip that not only is Richard a werewolf, but he's an alpha werewolf. And he's second in line to be in charge of the pack. And he's involved in this deadly battle to control the werewolf pack. And Anita's very upset that Richard has been concealing information from her, which I think Jean-Claude knew was going to happen.
Hmm.
But she gets a page from Dolph, so she goes to answer it. And of course, she has to go inspect a crime scene. So as they're traveling to the car, she's confronted by Gretchen, like one of the worst characters in this book. Gretchen is older, but not a master, and she is in love with Jean-Claude. Can we give a shout out to the woman who does the audiobooks with the different
Yes.
accents?
Kimberly Alexis, I
Oh,
want to shake her hand
I know. So
because to me
Gretchen
now, when
is like
I
this like German, like bitchy valley girl.
I love her.
So good.
She's such a character that you love to hate.
Oh,
Yeah, I want to shake this narrator's hand. Like,
so
I
good.
love Kimberly Alexis so much. If you're out there, Kimberly Alexis, I love you.
We love you so much. You have gone to the gym with us so many times you don't even know.
So many walks.
So many. Gretchen demands that Anita surrenders her claim to Jean-Claude and refuses to believe that Anita wishes to be rid of him. Jean-Claude arrives, confronts Gretchen in a rage. After the two vampires fly off, so now we find out Jean-Claude can fly, which he's been hiding from Anita. Anita drives to the crime scene, which is at a nature center. At the nature center, Anita is confronted by Deputy Atkinson, who tries to prevent her from investigating. She learns there is a vigorous dispute between Atkinson's Sheriff Titus, and Dolph over over whether or not the victim was a bear attack or a supernatural crime. Titus and Atkinson argue that they have already identified the incident as a bear attack and that no supernatural investigation is needed, while Dolph, Clive Perry, who we do get to meet in other books, he's a detective, and local police chief Garraway want to access the crime scene to find out what is going on. With the help of the local caretaker and naturalist Sam Williams, Anita's able to convince Titus to grant her access, and she determines that the attack was not a bear. She excludes the possibility of a flying attacker like a gargoyle or dragon and deduces that the murder victim was likely killed by a shapeshifter who laid in wait in an overhead branch, which was such a good scene when she's like looking up and realizes.
Yep.
She asks to have the claw prints and other clues sent to Washington University for inspection, knowing that Louis, which is the were-rat we met previously, will likely be able to identify the species of shapeshifter. When she arrives home, Anita finds Irving Griswold. Sorry, Louis is a werewolf. He's Richard's friend. Anita finds Irving Griswold waiting for her. Irving explains that Richard has been in succession conflict with the local pack leader, Marcus. Richard has actually beaten Marcus in a fight multiple times, but is unwilling to kill him and therefore fails to gain control of the pack. Marcus ordered Irving to contact Anita and ask her to meet with him, but Richard ordered Irving not to. Trapped between two alpha werewolves, Irving asks Anita's protection and Anita agrees. They go to meet Marcus. Irving leads Anita to the Lunatic Cafe, a restaurant which is likely or largely a lycanthrope clientele. Anita meets Lena and Alfred, two werewolves allied with Marcus, and is led to a back room where she meets several more shapeshifters. Although Marcus leads the largest group of shapeshifters in St. Louis, the non-wolf shapeshifters are disputing his authority. So in a nutshell, Marcus wants to be in charge of all the shapeshifters. He wants to be like king of everybody. Before, yeah, Marcus sticks around for a little while. Before Marcus can explain the problem, he and Anita argue over whether he is dominant to her. That ends with Anita drawing a gun, egged on by Gabriel and Lena. And we'll talk about them in a minute. Marcus orders Alfred to take the gun away from her, forcing Anita to shoot and kill Alfred. The blood excites the lycanthropes, who begin to have trouble maintaining their human appearance. Anita attempts to leave, but is grabbed by Jason, our werewolf from the first one. Saved by Jason. Raphael also saves Anita from the choice of whether to shoot Jason because he's starting to lose control. And so Raphael distracts Jason by his own blood. Anita escapes, aided by Casper. And we'll talk about Casper in a minute. Who doesn't shift because he is actually a were-swan. So he's not a predator. When it turns,
which I thought was a really interesting twist, having the non-predator
did too,
also
and
be
I don't
there.
know if they're
I was
gonna
like, "What do you
touch
mean
on
a
it.
swan?" Like,
Because he's
oh,
a curse. It's not a bloodborne disease. It was a curse. I thought that was so cool. While in the back room, the Anita a folder of information that Marcus wants her to use. On her way out, Anita sees Edward. Can you hear me?
my man's. Yeah, I can hear you now. You cut out a little bit, but I can hear you now.
Room. I didn't even touch it. So there's our boy Edward to sit in the restaurant. Like, how does he get around?
I don't know. I think he just uses his fancy powers and he teleports. And I love him.
At home, Anita reviews the folder and learns that in addition to Peggy, 7 other lycanthropes have disappeared. Anita contacts Edward to learn if he has anything to do with the disappearances, and he agrees to meet with her later. Unable to reveal the missing lycanthropes to the police, Anita discusses the disappearances with Ronnie, and they start to think that Peggy's disappearance might be part of a larger pattern. Later at work, Anita receives 2 potential clients. The first is Elvira Drew, who explains she's an author who wants to write a book on shapeshifters. Anita explains that most lycanthropes like to hide their identity. Anita's looking for a were-rat. She says, I'll look into it. The second client is Casper, or were-swan, who has told Bert that he's interested in raising an ancestor to lift a family curse. So this is when we find out that his condition is a curse. Then he admits to Anita when they're alone that he was actually sent by Marcus, was asked Casper to apologize for the previous night, and wants to ask Anita to help solve the shapeshifter disappearances. He admits that yes, he was cursed to transform into a swan by a witch centuries ago, and he's been walking the earth this way ever since. Anita arrives home and meets up with Richard for dinner. Richard is having trouble accepting the ease with which Anita kills, especially because Alfred, the werewolf that she killed the night before, was his friend. This sentence is wild. Anita and Richard reconcile, and Richard proposes marriage.
Yeah.
Remember that scene?
What an early 20s thing to do.
And she accepts it too. She's like, okay.
So my thing with Anita too, that I again see myself in, is she will make she tries to be very steadfast, but she will still make kind of impulsive, people-pleasing decisions.
And
that is so me.
They have not had sex. They're holding out. I don't know if they're going to get into it, but both Anita and Richard have had like one partner prior to this.
Yeah.
They are very naive when it comes to sex and just life in general.
Yeah.
Later, Anita meets Edward in his hotel room. Oh, I remember this part.
Yeah.
Gives Anita a snuff film in which Alfred and a masked were leopard have sex with a human woman in both human and animal forms. Near the end of the film, Alfred, then in wolfman form, kills the woman. I forgot about the snuff film. Edward explains that the woman's father has hired him to kill everyone in the movie, and Anita agrees to help. She explains, I've already killed the wolf. So we just...
And Edward's like, what?
They call Richard over, which is like the weirdest phone call ever. And then he sits and watches the movie, which he's not psyched about. Although he admits he's upset by it, his inner beast is excited by it. And Anita has second thoughts about their engagement. Richard tells him, yeah. So this is when Richard admits that Lena is behind these pornographic films, but he doesn't believe she'd be involved in snuff films. Richard agrees to speak to Marcus to see if he knows anything about these movies. The next evening, Anita meets with Lewis, who is able to identify the murder victim's wounds as having been caused by a lycanthrope. Anita asks Lewis whether he knows any were-rats who would be willing to participate in this interview with Elvira. Lewis offers to ask around. Lewis and Anita discuss whether Anita is emotionally capable of having a relationship with the werewolf. The werewolf is not the issue, okay? It's Richard.
Richard is the issue.
On her way out, Anita is confronted by Gretchen again, who threatens to kill her. Lewis is in Ratman form. Oh, so Lewis is a rat. I was right about that.
Yeah. Because he was Raphael.
Right. So Lewis is a rat, but he is Richard's best friend. Richard is a werewolf.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Lewis in Ratman form attacks Gretchen, but is outclassed and quickly beaten. Gretchen fights Louis, and uses his body as a shield against Anita's gun. Ultimately, Anita resolves the conflict by telling Gretchen that she has become engaged to Richard. This is when Gretchen is like, I want you to go tell Jean-Claude, and I want to see his face when you say it. And then this is when Anita has to like throw Louis over her shoulders and like walk to the Jeep. I remembered that scene.
It was rough.
were rat doctor. Yeah. I was just thinking about squats in general. I was like, that sounds fun. So she drops a Louis off with Lillian, and then she goes to see Jean-Claude. After a confrontation with Robert, the vampire, Anita and Gretchen go to see Jean-Claude. Jean-Claude is outraged that Anita has become engaged to Richard, but is able to sense both that Anita is having doubts about the engagement and that Anita also has feelings for him. So, most romantic gesture ever, he says, I'll tell you what, I won't kill Richard if you also date. So this is when he was like, it's not
so manipulative and gross to say it that way.
it's just like, but it kind of makes sense. So he's like, you have not given me the same chance that you've given Richard. So you have to date me like you're dating Richard. And then you have to give me a chance. Give me a couple months to woo you, and then we'll see what happens. And she's like, okay. Because the alternative is that Jean-Claude just kills Richard. And we all know he can't. And won't.
Yeah, we all know we can't. And that's part of the problem. Again, like at this moment, much as I love Jean-Claude, I was like, this is still incredibly problematic.
But also, it's not jump to the end, but he gets her out of like a really sticky situation. So
No, it totally ends up working in their favor somehow. But this is not, this should not be a prototype that we follow.
he doesn't want to do this.
Yeah.
That being said, for all the young people watching, if someone says, you can't marry him, you have to also date me because that's not fair, that's not normal. Okay. That is
Run.
super manipulative and very wrong.
Yeah, this only makes sense in the context of a fantasy book.
And then as this whole agreement happens, he turns to Gretchen and he's like, and now I'm going to punish you because you were trying to cause problems. And she's like, wait, what?
Yeah.
The old person writing this whole thing. Because she's like, you need to move on because she's with someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so, Jean-Claude said, nuh-uh. Like,
okay. So then they're interrupted by Rena, Gabriel, and Casper, who force their way past Robert to confront Jean-Claude. Gabriel attacks Anita, forcing her to stab him with a silver knife. But he forces the knife deeper, because this is when we find out Gabriel is a freak, and he likes
freaky
it.
Man.
See,
freaky man.
Even though it burns and hurts super bad, he's like into it. He is into it. This is when we find out that Jean-Claude is still having a really hard time getting control of the city. So he's really struggling to maintain his control. He has created this alliance with Marcus Reyna and the Werewolf Pack. And in order to maintain this alliance, Reyna demands that Jean-Claude supplies a vampire from porn movies. Jean-Claude orders Robert to do it, both mollifying Reyna and as a punishment for him allowing them to get past. As Anita leaves, Reyna and Gabriel begin forcing Casper to demonstrate how easy he can shapeshift. A lot of twisted people in this book. That night, phone call from Dolph. Because she's still unable to drive, Zabrowski picks her up. Oh, we haven't talked about Zabrowski.
I love Zabrowski.
I love Zabrowski.
He's such a little shit. I love him.
love their relationship. Zabrowski teases Anita about Richard and offers her relationship advice while he drives her to the scene. A giant snake skin is hooked on a river rock near the scene of the earlier murder. Anita and Deputy Atkinson enter the river to inspect the skin and are surprised to find a skinned human body still alive. They conclude that the victim is a Naga, an immortal creature able to assume human or snake form, and the Naga is taken to the hospital. That was a very cool scene in the water.
It was really, really good, yeah.
Very good. Anita arrives home to find both Richard and Jean-Claude waiting for her. Awkward. So awkward. And also, like, girl, change your locks. Too many people are getting into your house. They are close to blows over Richard's presence in the apartment and Jean-Claude's insistence that Anita date him. Anita tries to separate them. She feels their magical energy combine in her, which creates a great deal of magical power. This is important. She's threatened by the reaction of Jean-Claude and Richard, each of whom are involved in their own power struggles, are intrigued by the possibility. Red flag, red flag, red flag, red flag.
Yes.
So ultimately, Richard is told to leave, and she revokes her invitation to Jean-Claude. which forces them around. This is when we learn that the whore revoking her invitation comes. They get a call from Ronnie the next day, who tells Anita that she's found evidence that George Spitz was having an affair. Anita and Ronnie consider whether George may have killed his wife and the other missing shapeshifters. Shortly later, Richard calls and tells Anita that Jason is missing. Not Jason, I like him.
Not my puppy.
No, Anita asks Richard to get her back up for a confrontation with George. Richard is unable to accompany her, so he sends Raina and Gabriel, like the two freaking worst people.
Yeah.
They show up, they scare George. George admits that yes, he killed his wife. He was having an affair, but he did not kill any of the other ones. That's the important part of this.
Yeah.
And what happens in the whole scene is that Anita recognizes Gabriel's eyes as the were-leopard from the film. Snuff film.
Yeah.
Very important. George agrees to confess to the police in order to avoid being eaten by Raina and Pack. Important. So then they go to the hospital to question the Naga, because she's recognized that Peggy's death has nothing to do with the rest of shapeshifters. The Naga is not fully coherent, but is able to tell them that he was attacked by witches. We got our first witches! Yay!
Love witches.
Not like the best representation of witches, but we got witches are in the picture. I'm loving it.
They exist.
So this is when she recognizes that Elvira Drew, the author in her office who wanted to meet with a were-rat, is likely a witch, and she's hunting shapeshifters. So she contacts the office and finds out that Elvira that Bert put Elvira in contact with Fane, her were-rat friend who's now missing. Whoops.
Yes.
Anita, Dalton, Zabrowski, and several officers go to Elvira's house, but Elvira will not let them in. Anita breaks into the back porch and basement and is confronted by Elvira, but screams for help, allowing the police to enter. At that point, the police are attacked by two other witches, so we find out it's a coven, each of whom have used the skin of one of the missing lycanthropes to shapeshift. So essentially, they were collecting lycanthropes. So they had a wolf skin, a snake skin, all this stuff, and they were using that as witches to shapeshift. So they were on the hunt for a rat. There was never a book. The book was never going to happen.
Yeah.
So they are able to kill all but Elvira. She escapes, and they find Louis in the basement. Thankfully, he is okay, and they're able to preserve the secret, but Jason is still missing. So they don't know where Jason is. Anita realizes the witches are responsible for the shapeshifter disappearances, but they still need to find Jason. Anita gets a call from Sam Williams, the caretaker of the nature preserve where the murder victim was found. Williams has been listening to his tapes of nighttime wildlife, and he heard the call of a hyena. He and Anita deduce that there must have been a were-hyena in the park. But before they can finish the call, Williams explains that the police officers are at his door. She says, "Don't open the door," but he does, and the line goes dead. This was such a tense scene. Anita races to the nature preserve, accompanied by Richard and Edward for backup. Edward!
More Edward!
They find William shot dead, together with two of the local police who were present at the original crime scene. Anita gets a page from Casper, who asks her, "Please come to my house." When Anita, Richard, and Edward go to Casper's house, they are captured by Titus, Atkinson, and 3 hunters. So our 2 deputies that we hate and a couple of hunters, and they find out that Casper was once a European prince and hunter who was cursed to transform into a swan. However, Casper just became more and more resentful at being cursed. He's transformed into prey, and so he formed a scheme with Titus to capture shapeshifters and offer them up for expensive and illegal hunts. I thought this was such a cool reveal.
It was awesome.
They want to hunt werewolves. I'm like, that's so cool. So the initial murder victim had been a hunter whose hunt had gone wrong. Titus and Atkinson had tried to cover it up. However, Titus realizes that the other police now know too much. He and Atkinson plan to flee after one last hunt. They lock Edward and Richard in a cage and Anita in a second cage together with Jason, reasoning the approaching moon, Jason will not be able to resist transforming into a wolf, eating Anita
at which point they will then let him free and hunt him. So this is when we find out Jason is a young person.
Yeah.
So
He's a puppy.
and don't
He's just a weird puppy.
he was like involved in a sex act and like got scratched because he's a
Yeah, I think so.
yeah.
He's a little freak, but he's a puppy, and I love him.
So initially, Richard is able to restrain Jason as a dominant alpha werewolf. At that point, the hunters cut open one of Anita's wounds, anticipating that the blood would force Jason to lose control. As they do so, Anita is able to get a hold of one of the hunter's guns and shoots him. In the confusion, Edward and Richard are able to grab and kill a second hunter. Edward uses the rifle to kill Titus and the third hunter. Anita stabs Atkinson. She and Edward leave, allowing Richard to take the now transformed Jason out to hunt just as the police arrive. The police accept Anita and Edward's story, as well as Edward's identification, because he's got some good fake identification.
Get some great fakes.
Yeah, he does. In the epilogue, Anita explains that she is continuing to date Richard, and now Jean-Claude has exchanged Christmas presents with each of them. Lena and Gabriel have claimed that they have no idea Alfred was involved in planning to kill them in a snuff film. Anita has accepted their explanation now. A few months after the events in the main novel, Edward sent Anita a swan skin with a note explaining that Marcus had hired him to kill Casper and that Edward will eventually track down the fugitive and has been hired a witch to lift his curse, allowing Edward to kill him. Anita has the skin framed and mounted on her wall. That is such
that's probably like listening to it back in the synopsis. It's probably one of my favorites of the series so far. I love the whole scene when they were all in the cages and Jason was trying to resist turning. Probably one of my favorite moments in the whole series. Just because at that moment, like everyone, including Richard, is just super likable. And like you're just rooting for Jason. I was in that moment, again, I go back to, she set me up with Philip. So now every male, like younger brother type character that I like in the series, like Larry, like Jason, I'm so paranoid that she's going to kill him off.
Well,
So I was waiting for him to change.
He has established that Anita will kill him.
Yeah.
So there was that fine moment where you were like, she's going to kill him. And then she's never going to be involved with this. So I was very, very worried that. Yeah. Even knowing how it turns out, that moment is so tense. Yeah. In the cage of Richard screaming at Jason and Edward telling Anita, kill him. You're just like, kill Jason.
Oh, you can't kill a puppy. He's just a baby.
So we are at 2 hours. I thought this would be lengthy. I didn't think it would be this long, but this is such good discussion. So
I love it. This has been fun.
I think I would rather wrap this up and just have a surprise part 2 because this was supposed to be the season finale.
Amazing.
So in the season finale, we're going to have a surprise part 2 where
hooray!
We're going to have another bottle of wine. We're going to talk about the next 4 books. By then, we might even be able to add Obsidian Butterfly at the rate we're going.
I mean, so good. Well, thank you again for having me on. I am excited for part 2 and however many other parts you want to do as we can go through all 30 books. I don't care. This has been really fun.
The tension is so high at this point. We're all at the just make out, please. It's so good. This is such a good place to pause.
Hell yeah.
All right. Enjoy your night. We'll be in touch for part 2.
Absolutely. See you later.
Bye.
And big finish. Thank you.